Imagine being enslaved and suing the guy who owns you. Like, imagine the brass that takes. Well, that's what James Somerset does in 1772, and it leads to one of the most important cases in British legal history. James Somerset was an African man who was kidnapped into slavery as a child and sent to the Americas, where he worked for a guy called Charles Stuart. Charles Stuart moves to London and he brings James Somerset with him, where James Somerset gets baptised. In the 18th century, a lot of enslaved people believed that if you got baptised, you automatically got freed because you weren't allowed to be enslaved if you're a Christian. So he goes to Stuart and he's like, right, I did the baptism thing, I can go now, right? And Stuart's like, no, that's not how it works. It doesn't matter if you're a Christian or not. So on the 1st of October 1771, James Somerset walks out. 2 months later, Stuart's men kidnap him off the street and imprison him to be sent back to the Americas. But before he can be sent back, Somerset's friends realise what's happening and they get a message to this guy called Granville Sharp, who was a big-time abolitionist and a lawyer. Somerset argues that he's been denied habeas corpus, which is your right to not be imprisoned for no reason. He says, sure, by the laws of Virginia and Africa I was legally enslaved, but in England, slavery's never been made explicitly legal, and therefore, in England, I am owed habeas corpus. The case is decided by the Lord Chief Justice himself, Judge Mansfield, so you'll sometimes hear it referred to as the Mansfield decision. Mansfield rules in Somerset's favour, but he is very specific about saying he's not deciding whether or not James Somerset is enslaved. He's deciding that even if he is enslaved, he's still allowed habeas corpus. Now, we know from newspaper adverts for runaway slaves and from for sale notices in London newspapers that this decision does not stop people being enslaved in Britain. That doesn't get made illegal for another 50 years. But people all over the world do not read the actual decision, they just read the headline version. And so all over the world, lots of people, both enslaved and slavers, believe that the Mansfield decision has abolished slavery on the British mainland. And if enough people believe something like that, it does sort of start being true. We know that enslaved people like Phyllis Wheatley and Mary Prince use the Mansfield decision as leverage for their own freedoms without having to go through the court. I cannot imagine being brave enough to sue your legal owner in court, given what will happen to you if you lose. James Somerset must have been a really strong person, and I wish we knew more about him.